Yes, yes. This is a good time for questions. Yes.
When you know this, resonate with this, feel this, so much of my life, this is truly what I want, truly what I know that I truly am, deeply, deeply. And yet, it's so easy to be pulled away from it, to be pulled out. And I don't want that anymore, but yet, it just, and I guess that term, awakened, enlightened, that's when you stay. Just stay always in that. But you talk about how um, we want to, we choose the other, but yet I don't want to choose the other, and yet we get pulled. Suddenly I'm looking and going, oh no, here we are again.
Yeah, well, it's a moment by moment choice. So when you get pulled, what you say, you get pulled into the me story, there is something that interested you. I don't know, something about your relationship, your work, your home, whatever. Something interested you at that moment, at that particular moment. The me quality sort of got triggered and engaged, and so that was the choice of that moment. Now, when you say, well, I want to, recognize myself across the board and not just be pulled away, um, it's about noticing that you're in the me story. It's at that moment that there is the choice, in the recognition. Oops, well, here I am spinning again. Done it so many times that I need to get this or we need to do that in order to get that, and then I'll be happy, whatever. Because behind the scenes, always being happy in the future, in time. So it's that moment of recognizing that, oh, that's what's going on. That's when the choice is made, not when you're already, and it's not about, oh gee, why did I? Because as soon as you go into, well, why did I choose, the me, why did I choose to go into the spin, into the separate me spin, 3 minutes ago? That in itself is an I spin. I mean, why did I choose to go south instead of going north? That in itself is an I spin. You see that? It's amazing. Oh, gee, I should be better by now. I should have improved by now. Or, the whole self-blame, or that whole measurement and judgment of the self is this personal self trait. The separate self operates in the realm of measurement, judgment, and regrets. It always operating in time. Me in time. I should be. I should have. If I do such and such a thing, then I will attain such and such. Why am I? Why did I? When will I? It's always a time conversation. But when you realize, oh, wait a minute, I am in the time. I'm in the me in time. Me as a person in time. At that moment, there is the choice of it's done at that moment. It's a recognition at that moment of, oh, well, that's what's going on, and it doesn't go to the next step of, gee, why is this going on, or when will this stop going on, when will this cease, when will I be at a better place, you see, because in fact you never leave the self, you never are not consciousness, you never You're never actually a separate self. You're never actually a woman. It's just a dream conversation. So to be so concerned about not being a woman in itself is a me conversation, is a separate self conversation. You're never not the self. So it's just noticing the images on the screen and realizing, oh, there is that image, the me, the separate self quality, thought, sensation is on board. The program has been downloaded. The subroutine is operating. There is a noticing. Yeah. And that in itself is a light. It's a light of consciousness in recognizing. It's play. It's the play of consciousness. It all is the play of consciousness. So there's no real problem. It's very important not to buy into the impression that the separate self presents that there is a real problem, because that's what the separate self is. It's a problem conversation. And when we say yes to the problem conversation, it's very depressing. It's really unhappy. You don't even sleep good at night with tossing and turning about this problem self. It's a conversation, and that's what the separate self is. It's an avoidance and pursuit process, but none of it has any reality, because there's only one reality, which is the reality of consciousness. None of the conversations have an independent reality to themselves. They're all sort of the dream conversations. So you already are the borderless presence. You already are the aware presence, aware awareness, consciousness, presence, beingness. You already are the divine presence. So it's really important not to struggle against anything, because in the struggle is the self, is the separate self, is the me. The me impression is a struggling impression. It's really important you don't have a personal aim, personal goal, that you be sort of surrendered to God, through and through in your thoughts, in your feelings, in your sensations, in your beingness, in your wholeness, to be surrendered to the divine, surrendered to the truth, to the reality of consciousness. It's only one reality, that's the reality of consciousness, and it knows what to do. It does everything. It is the only reality. So what is it that is concerned? What is it that's trying to fix himself or herself, or fix their world, or fix their situation? What is it? Now, from a happy, relaxed place, you can choose this or that. You can choose to stay up all night to read the scriptures, read, or just stay listen to some sage speaking. You could, but out of your joy and freedom and love, not out of any expectation, not out of any desire for a destination. Because as soon as you're desiring a destination, there is a need to pay attention to that, because it's so easy for that for the separate me impression to contract and go after a goal. It's not happy. Now, on the other hand, you could go for a 20-mile hike and be very happy because you're doing it out of your love, out of your freedom, out of your joy, out of your sense of exploration, sense of creativity, sense of play. That's very beautiful. It's quite different from doing it for a certain personal aim. So the whole spiritual interest, at some point, it comes to that. It comes to just the loving the contemplation. Not about solving a problem. At some point in time, it becomes just a loving and enjoyment, a joy in contemplation, rather than a personal pursuit, and rather than a so. From at the mind level, there is a measurement, because in this ignorance, in this identification with the body-mind, there is that contracted state that perceives itself in time and space and hopes for the decontracted state, wants and loves the decontracted state, but pursues it in time and space, pursues the happiness in activity, in the mind, in the world, in the body. We might exercise, we might become a raw vegetarian, a raw for vegetarianism. So, but when this pursuit is in the world, body, mind, it is promising happiness down the line. If I do this, I do that, be happy down the line. So the question, when will I ever get there, is always on board. It makes sense that that question would be always on board, because freedom and the happiness is promised. It's a firm promise, but it's down the tube, down the pipe. So when will I get there is a package, part of the package. I've been meditating for 20 years, or 30 years, when will I get there? It's part of the package. When there is the contracted state, meaning the identification of consciousness with the body-mind, and the belief and the pursuit of happiness in the world, body-mind. What accompanies that is, when will I get there? When is it going to become steady? When is it going to stop wavering? Now, having said all that, through your contemplation, such as this contemplation, this Satsang, there are unnoticed shifts, you know. We just sort of in Satsang, there's a poking, you poke at stuff, shift them, you know. maybe at an unnoticed level. And that goes a long way. Might not be recognized, but it does the job. Oh, what I just said.
At the unconscious level.
Yes, what I just said is that through your contemplation, and through the presence in satsang, and through the conversation that happens in satsang, that seems to be clear at times and quite mysterious at other times, there is a what is it called, that surgery that they do with the laser? There is a laser surgery that is happening behind the scene. Yeah, you are anesthesia. You are under anesthesia, and the doctor is operating. And the doctor's operation goes a long way in restoring your health.
My understanding of what we are discussing now is basically on the conceptual level. So how do we go beyond the concepts?
Mm. The conceptual realm has a background. That is not conceptual. It is that background that calls you home, that calls you. And at some point, the conceptual realm that might initially be orchestrated by the mind, or might initially be abducted by the mind, at some point the background starts to inspire and conduct the conceptual show. And at that point, the conceptual realm, rather than pointing you from concept to concept and spinning you in the mind, it starts to direct you via the conceptual to the non-conceptual. In other words, it brings you to its edge rather than the conceptual realm remaining in the building more and more concepts. It starts to conceptually explore, and as it's exploring, it's deconstructing rather than constructing. So it's about the ripening of your love for truth. It's about the flowering, like a plant starts with a small bud and sprout, and then it sort of becomes a little tender plant, and in time it grows to have a trunk and so on. So there is also that aspect, that sort of metaphoric aspect to the spiritual exploration. In that your spiritual exploration, varying depending on how it started, it is usually some sort of glimpse, some sort of something that touches you deeper than at the mind level. When you are touched at a deeper dimension than at the mind level, you're interested now in not just living your conditioned life, but you also have some curiosity initially. It becomes eventually an interest, and then it becomes a love, and then it becomes a celebration of the contemplation. So in using the conceptual, in using concepts, try to wonder or contemplate, explore what the concept refers to. Like the concept tree refers to an experience, which we call a tree. Now the concept consciousness refers to an experience, which is the experience of consciousness, not just to a concept. Of course, as soon as we use language, we say consciousness or awareness or presence, it's inevitable that we are using concepts, language and concepts. But this concept points to an experience. When it's just used, just referring to itself, just the concept referring to itself, it's really empty. It doesn't have any value, and then it becomes strictly like a mental argumentation, mental debate. It's silly. But when you are using language, using concepts, but you're referring to what the concept points to, it's a different conversation. And it's always important when you are exploring, using concept, to speak from your experience. And of course, you will have to use concepts to express. But what you're expressing is your experience, or your question, or something that is more at the experiential level, and not strictly at the conceptual level. Then the concept ceases to be an end in itself, but a vehicle to explore, your experience by somehow formulating your experience via concepts, and then hopefully it is being met and explored. And you can tell when the conversation is just going in purely just conceptual realm, because especially if you're interested in truth and not in being a scholar, in this case talking about spirituality, a spiritual scholar. That's not, if your interest is not in being a spiritual scholar, but in being in the truth, you can sense when it's becoming scholarly, and then okay, well then if you have no choice, you just sit through it and sip some tea, you know. Hopefully it won't last for too long, you know. There is a recognition. There is a resonance that is beyond the words. That's what really matters, because the resonance goes deeper than the mind, deeper than the mind level.
Maybe about a couple of years ago, I was at a session with Francis, and I asked him a question. Well, I put a question to him, and I did a very lousy job of it. He had the audacity to try to answer what I'd asked rather than what I thought I'd asked, and resulted in our talking for a half hour or more. And during the time, he made some comment, and I said, that would be an example of the self-recognizing the self, right? And he said, yes. And he said, but a lot of people don't know what that feels like. He said, it feels like happiness. It feels like happiness. And since we were going on for a long time, I didn't ask him an obvious question, and that was, anytime you feel happiness, is that an example of the self-recognizing the self? Or is the self-recognizing self only one example of the cause of happiness? So that's my question.
Yeah. So consciousness recognizing itself, and the experience of that is peace and happiness, causeless peace and happiness. Is a direct, it's a recognition that does not go via any medium or media. It's a direct recognition. That does not necessitate, does not go via the world, body, mind. But it celebrates.
Like a priority knowledge, knowing yourself.
It's even beyond the a priori, because a priori still has some a before, like a sense of before the world, body, mind. At least that's how I understand the term a priori. Before. So it's not a priori in that sense, in that it is before the arising of the world, body, mind. It's actually, it's the absence of any arising. It's the absence of the arising of the world, body, mind. It's a recognition, it's consciousness knowing itself. And the world, body, mind are non-existent. But I'm not referring to like a deep sleep state. I'm referring to a waking state. But the waking state and the dream state, deep dream state, come together. And the deep dream quality, which is that of peace and happiness in the absence of the world, body, mind, and the waking state, which is the presence of the world, body, mind, come together as one. So the experience of causeless peace and happiness, consciousness knowing itself, is causeless peace and happiness. It's hard to describe, really. I would say that, like Francis speaks of it, in the absence or the presence of the world, body, mind. But it's more, the presence of the world, body, mind is not the same presence of the world, body, mind that we're familiar with from the ignorant state. It's a world, body, mind that is indistinguishable from consciousness. Bring me back to your question if I'm straying away from your question, because I'm sort of in a conversation about this. So the presence or the absence of a world, body, mind experience is totally inconsequential for consciousness, for happiness. But what it does out of its freedom and sense of play is that it loves to play and it celebrates. And this is a perfect example of it. The play of Satsang, the celebration of this is celebration. But it celebrates 24/7. While maybe the celebration until we are stabilized in that state, the celebration is a sporadic one. When consciousness knows itself and has established itself in that knowingness, then it's a 24/7 celebration. It's beyond time and space. Even to say 24/7 is, but it's just, conversation to refer to it goes into the eternal. It's an eternal, its happiness has an eternal, a causeless, eternal quality. Causeless. The causeless. So it's a complete absence. It's a presence as an absence. It's not a vacuity sort of absence. It is a presence at the same time an absence.
But with ignorance or Maya covering this, there may be a glimpse every now and then, and that glimpse, is that not the experience of happiness?
Yes. Oh, yes. Whenever, I mean, what happiness refers to in across the board is a peak in the divine. It's the light of consciousness shining through, unimpeded. So it shines through the crack, shines through the travails of the mind. It's sort of at that moment, at moments of happiness, there is no mind. Moments of happiness, there is no mind. The mind might attribute a cause, a worldly cause to happiness. And that's a conversation. That's strictly a mind conversation. Because the mind wants to, it wants to always be part of the show. The mind basically wants to claim that even in its absence, it was present. You know what I mean? That, oh, I, the separate me, was happy. But actually, happiness is the absence of the separate self. Like love is the absence of separation, the absence of two becoming one. That's in the relationship, is love. When there is love, there is, in a way, they talk about intoxication. It's like you're intoxicated. When you're intoxicated, you forget your mind. You're out of your mind, in a way. Because at that moment there is no more you as the mind. There's no more you. That's in a relationship, that's love. So these timeless moments of happiness, as we are more and more loving the happiness and not the causes of happiness, they become more and more available to us, more and more our experience, because our love flows towards the happiness and not towards the causes. Initially, the mind is in the causes of happiness. Okay, I don't know, a better relationship, a better job, a better home, whatever. It's looking for happiness and exploring happiness and pursuing happiness in its so-called causes. What causes happiness? It's not going straight to the source. But as you are in your contemplation, realize that happiness is absence of mind, and that this whole conversation about, oh, I was happy because I went to Hawaii and spent 2 weeks in Hawaii or whatever, that is not what actually happiness is. And then your interest in the mind dwindles. You park yourself less and less in the mind and more in just happiness. So then you could say, well, oh, gee, I don't know what happiness is. I don't know how to get to it. At that moment, then you are back in the mind conversation. Unnoticed to you, you just went back and parked yourself in the mind and said, okay, well, gee, okay, so how do I get there? But it's a mind conversation. Mind says, oh, well, go to Satsang. This is the mind speaking, but it's a mind that has gotten a little zap, a little vitamin shot from consciousness. Because indeed, what brings you to the truth might also be a mind conversation. But it's a mind conversation that is sort of inspired by a different purpose that is more impersonal than personal. But when the mind tells you, oh, well, you need a better wife or a better home or a better job or whatever, a better husband or I don't know, for your therapist, then you're inadvertently, you've parked yourself in the mind and you've given power and force and validity to the mind. And you forgot at that moment that happiness is causeless. It's causeless. It's not caused by the mind. So the recognition that happiness is causeless is a sort of relaxation into presence, rather than some technique to. It's relaxation in the presence. It might sound as a technique, but it's more like a recognition of the presence that's already relaxed. There is a relaxed presence that doesn't have it's not personal presence. It's an impersonal presence. It's like a divine presence. Or it's the recognition of what is real in this moment. The recognition of what is real, which is the reality of consciousness, that has no personal borders. It's not contained in any specific form. Actually, the form sort of appears in it, like this form, this perception. You can look at this perception as a form that's appearing in the reality of consciousness, which is the reality of this experience. The reality of this experience is consciousness. So the experience of happiness is tied in to the recognition of the reality of consciousness, which is the reality of our experience.
Perhaps straight, but don't worry, be happy is much more profound.
Yeah, don't worry, be happy, be happy. Yes, no, it's a, in being happy, there is no person on one being happy. There is no person. That's a key thing. Because happiness is universal. It's not like my happiness and not yours. It's not that way.
Just like it's not mine now and not your now.
It's not my now and your now, right? Yes, right.
That's easy.
Exactly. Yeah. All events appear in the same non-space, in the same non-dimension, which is the non-dimension of consciousness, the dimensionless dimension of consciousness. Irrespective of what the mind might say, because the mind might say, oh no, this is my experience and you are having your experience. Now, irrespective of that conversation, all events are actually non-events. All events are actually non-events.
So might you say that just the dropping down is that happiness is the result of that. That's what is there. The dropping, the mind is gone, and all that is there is just, when we call it happiness, it's just a stillness, which is a happy state,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah,
not really
the
an
happiness we're talking about is not a state.
Right.
So it's not a state, and it's not the result of anything. It is, and it is it is not about the dissolution of the separate self, because the separate self never really, it's a dream. There is no reality to the separate self. It's more of an understanding that it already is so.
Yeah.
So it's a standing under the whole phenomenal activity.
Yes.
Standing.
I use the word dropping just because there is a sensation of everything falling away from me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just,
Yeah.
it's the closest word
Right.
that comes to that
Yes.
sensation. And the result, although that's just a word to fill in, is is peace, is stillness, is happiness.
Yeah, but
The words are not.
no, I understand limitations to the words, but we're using them as a medium to express and to explore and to point. Now, as long as there is a dropping, there is still there's still some process, there is still something that is dropping, and I know that I understand that you're using language, and there is a limitation to that, but just with staying within the language that was used, that so so let's say that it's a dropping until the end of the dropping, until there's no more dropping, but there is the non-experience of peace and happiness, the just consciousness knowing itself beyond time and space, outside of time and space, and beyond the mind. It's it's the end of the journey, but it's not an empty. It's not a vacuity. It is
It's full.
it's
love.
Yes. It's love. It's beauty. It's transparency. It's presence. It's intelligence. It's wisdom. It's
Do you recommend controlling the mind or ignoring the mind for clarity? Like, why not?
just in controlling or in limiting, there is not much love. Just love it. Love everything. Just love. Just be. Just love. Love it doesn't have much resistance or argumentation in it. Everything that is sent to you is divine. The messenger is God. God is presenting you with all these thoughts, body, mind, and so how can we not just bow to that and say, yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolute yes, and open heart, and trusting the divine, trusting the divine at that deep level where we're not offering anything for any return. We're offering everything for no return. That's the beauty. The beauty is when you're offering without any expectation of any return. You're just giving out of the openness of your heart. It's tremendous. It's very beautiful that way. And we are in the beauty and the love in that way. So once you start controlling or trying to limit the mind or direct the mind, you are in the myriad conditions, infinite forms and ways, and the routines and subroutines unending. It's a labyrinth that just gets more and more, complex. It's the most complex spider webs upon spider webs that run into all directions, not just the three directions, the zillion directions. No. And not just about being, open at, the mind level, meaning whatever is arising to sort of be open, but also at the feeling level, and that's where really things sometimes get like really tougher to deal with, when we're feeling crossed, irritated, disappointed, I don't know, failing at something, or somebody failed us at the feeling level, to also come to the spaciousness, which is the infinite spaciousness. It's a divine spaciousness.
I'm getting this whole sense of the appreciation of simplicity that is sort of just speaking for myself. This underlies this the kind of love that essentially not needing anything and really having a deep appreciation of the uncomplex, by contrast. The simple is this sort of portal, is this sort of doorway.
Yes. It's very simple, and it's like when we go at night and lie down in bed, the mind spins a little bit and then it sort of relaxes. How simple it is! It's really very simple, but it's so beautiful. It's very. Or when we have a child and the child comes and sits in our lap, mommy, daddy, whatever sits in your lap, and then they sort of relax in your lap. It's so simple, yet it's so beautiful. Yeah, it's right. It's the and there is simplicity in non-arguing, and complexity in arguing.
I'm able to understand, like, when the mind runs its own, I'm able to catch it, like, oh yeah, my mind is running. But then it's again goes in the loop, like it goes out of control because I'm watching it.
Yes.
So that's why it's like,
Mm-hmm.
if I try to control, it's gonna be more worse.
Yeah.
Just leave it as it is, it just goes on.
Yeah. What you could try to sort of, contemplate is follow what is happy for you. If it's happy for you to observe the mind and, it has to be happy. Has to feel full and happy. It's like, yes, yeah, I love that. You know, I love that. You see. So sometimes when we're trying to fix ourselves, we think, oh, goodness, something's wrong with me. We're trying to fix it. We believe that's really important. It's fine. Ask yourself, am I really happy doing that? Is this really happy? Just stay with the happiness. Stay with the, be open to the thoughts, the feelings, the perceptions, the relationships that have that happy quality to them. It's a process. It might not be easy right from the start, but be open for that direction. And you might find that some activities or some practices or some habits that you had in the past just are not happy for you now. Maybe they were meaningful at a certain time in your life, but right now they don't feel happy. They don't feel fulfilling. Maybe out of habit we're still maintaining them, or out of a sense of that's the right thing to do, we maintain them, or that's the tradition. So yeah, if it's not vibrating in a happy way, then just be still. Don't pursue it. Don't pursue it, because being still, might initially feel like, oh goodness, it might seem dangerous. Like, oh, this tendency of, I need to fix it, and now can I be still? What's going to happen to me? It might be surprising to you that nothing is going to happen to you, in just being still. Even when some things seem to be that, happening that calling you to act, but you know that this sort of action is just, it's not happy, So, and you look like, what is the way? What is the happy way? And you don't find any. Just be still. It's better not to engage in a habitual response that complicates things. It's better not to engage in complex, responses. Then, am I saying it correctly? It's better to be still than to engage in responses that are increase the complexity and don't feel happy. So there's a certain degree of trust, but you can experiment with it. You can experiment and see, well, gee, I tried to be still and it was 100 times worse, I don't know. You might be interested in trying it a few more times. Who knows? Maybe it will shift. Maybe being still at certain moments might reveal that, oh wow, it's really the whole complexity is dissolved. And I that I used to do all these things, I was just there, just present, doing nothing. You see. So it's an experimentation. And you see how it unfolds. Yes.
Sorry, I have to catch a plane.
Beautiful, safe travel.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. What Francis says, follow your bliss. He talks very often about follow your bliss. It's a very powerful path, the path of bliss and happiness. But you will find that when you're following your, what makes you happy, that when you perceive your happiness in some form, in some object, and you need to experiment with that, and maybe you have already, we all have to, otherwise we won't be here. You will find that doesn't deliver the goods. It doesn't. You think your happiness is going to be in getting, that raise. When you get the raise, your happiness will be short-lived, because really at that moment Your happiness was not because of the raise, but because of the end of your desire. But when you got your raise, your desire for the raise disappeared. So the happiness is not getting the raise, it's the end of desire.
I'm on to the next desire.
Well, once you understand, I mean, at a certain level, it has to go to a deep level that
What you do.
that happiness is the end of desire, meaning the absence of desire. Then when another desire arises, you're a little bit more wary. It's like, wait a minute, you know, if happiness is the absence of desire, and now I am entertaining a new desire, then in a way I'm entertaining unhappiness,
Absolutely.
you know. And you're free to go for it. You can go for it.
Ad nauseam.
Iteration, you know, the next, you know, what is iteration number a million and
Take
take, you know,
300,000
right,
6.
take, yes.